Today I want to share with you how to make turkey bone broth in the slow cooker, but I'll also share directions for how to do this on the stovetop and in the Instant Pot. Plus, I want to share some ideas for herbs and spices that you can add to this turkey bone broth to make it exceptionally nourishing, especially during this cold and flu season. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, sourdough, ferments, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Well, if you made a turkey for Thanksgiving and you're left with the carcass and the neck and the bones and some scraps, this is the perfect time to make turkey bone broth. And how I like to do this is just to go ahead and add everything right into my slow cooker. But you can also do this on the stovetop, and the directions are pretty much the same. Now, if you want to do this in an Instant Pot, the directions are slightly different. And I have a video where I make chicken bone broth in an Instant Pot, which I'll link to in the iCards above, and I'll put a link to my whole Instant Pot playlist in the description below. But what you do when you make bone broth in the Instant Pot, and this would apply to turkey bone broth, is that you want to put it on low pressure and you want to cook it, or pressure cook it, for 2 hours. And that should give you a beautiful gelatinous bone broth. Now in the slow cooker or on the stovetop, we're going to do it for 6 hours. And we hopefully want to be able to maintain it at a temperature of about 180 degrees Fahrenheit, because that's the best temperature to create your most gelatinous bone broth, because that's a temperature at which the collagen is able to be extracted from the bones and create a nice gelatinous bone broth. Now yes, in the Instant Pot, the temperature is a little higher, but on low, it's not as high as if it were on high, which is a little too high for when making bone broth. Although it's on high, some collagen is able to withstand the higher temperature. So you should also be able to get somewhat of a gelatinous bone broth in the Instant Pot. Now I find that I get my most gelatinous bone broth from the slow cooker or the stovetop, and that the bone broth from the Instant Pot is gelatinous, just not as gelatinous. But it's still very healthy, very good for you, and if you're short on time, I always say it's best to make bone broth no matter what way you make it. So what I do is I just take all of my bones, my scraps, the carcass, the neck, anything I've got, and I just go ahead and put this right into my slow cooker. And if you're doing this on the stovetop, just get a nice big stock pot. This slow cooker is about an 8-quart, so you can use an 8-quart stock pot, and that should work out very well to hold the carcass of a 12 to 15 pound turkey along with all the scraps. Now whenever I make a poultry-based bone broth, I always like to add what I call my secret ingredient or my insurance policy, which are chicken feet. Now I always add these to my chicken bone broth, and I'm going to add them to my turkey bone broth. And you can also add these to beef bone broth. A lot of people have asked me about this. I've received a lot of questions on some of my beef bone broth videos where maybe you couldn't find high cartilage bones like oxtails or knuckles or patellas, and you also maybe didn't like the price of them if they were a little high, because oxtails can sometimes run $10 a pound. And so you wanted to know if you could use chicken feet. And yes, you can. Chicken feet work fine in beef bone broth. I personally think they're well worth adding to pretty much any bone broth, because they will create a lovely gelatinous bone broth. Now you can often find chicken feet at the farmer's market. With bone broth becoming popular now, I've even seen these at the supermarket. But if you can't find them from your farmer's market or the supermarket or a local farm, you know, sometimes farmers will sell them as well. If not, you can also find these from U.S. Wellness Meats. That's the place where some of you have asked me, where do I buy my bones and so on and so forth for making beef bone broth. I love buying beef bones from them, and I also have bought chicken feet from them. And actually these chicken feet are from them. And if that's something that you're interested in, you know, ordering bones or chicken feet, so on and so forth online, they also sell all kinds of meats and chickens and ham and so on and so forth. I'll put a link in the description below, and be sure to check that out because I have a 15% discount code. So that's a nice savings. So let's go ahead and put in these chicken feet. Now don't worry if you don't have chicken feet. Your turkey bone broth is going to come out beautiful, with or without them. As I said, they're just, for me, they're my insurance policy. But the next thing that I like to do is add some sort of acid to help acidulate the water, because the acid helps to extract the maximum amount of collagen out of the bones and out of the cartilage and out of the skin. And so the reason that we want to do that is because the more collagen that we can extract will make a more gelatinous bone broth. Basically, collagen is cooked gelatin. Does that make sense what I just said? Collagen. Yeah, gelatin is cooked collagen. But in any event, the reason that we want a gelatinous bone broth is that it's very good at soothing and nourishing our gut. It's good for our skin, our hair, our nails. It's just so overall good for us. So the more gelatinous, the more collagen that we can extract out of the bone broth, the more gelatinous we can make it, the more gelatin rich we can make the bone broth, the better. Now, to acidulate the water, I like to use some type of fortified wine. You can also use a regular wine, like a regular white wine, but I generally don't have that on hand. I like fortified wines because they're the type of wines that are normally known as an aperitif or an after-dinner drink, something like that. And they're a little sweeter, and they usually have a screw top on the bottle, and they can last a long time in your pantry, and that's why I love them. And I love using them when I make bone broth. Now, if you don't want to use any alcohol, that's fine. You can certainly use apple cider vinegar. But if you do, I recommend only going with 1/4 cup, because I personally find that the apple cider vinegar can leave a little bit of a strong aftertaste in the bone broth if you use too much. It just doesn't seem to cook off, you know, like alcohol, the flavor tends to cook off. But apple cider vinegar seems to stay very strong in bone broth. So if you do use that to extract the collagen, to acidulate the water, I recommend only going with 1/4 cup versus the acidulated wine, which I'm going to add 1 cup. And if you use a regular wine, you can also use 1 cup. And what I'm using, the fortified wine I'm using, is white vermouth. Next, the nice thing about making bone broth, any bone broth for that matter, is it can kind of be a little bit of a clean out the crisper type of thing. If you have a little celery that's past its prime, carrots that are past their prime, onions that maybe are not as firm as you'd like them to be, whatever the case may be, these are great for adding to your bone broth. Vegetables add a lot of minerals to your bone broth. There are a little bit of minerals in the bone, but not to the extent of the minerals that you're going to get by adding vegetables. So it's very important to add vegetables to your bone broth to make it rich in minerals. The one thing that I don't like to add, which if you've seen some of my other bone broth videos that I've shared with you, is garlic. I find that when you add garlic and it simmers for a long time, like in a bone broth, 6 hours for our poultry bone broths, 12 hours for our beef bone broths, 6 hours for our ham bone broths, or pork bone broths, it gets an off-putting flavor. I would much rather add the garlic later when I go to drink it, or with whatever recipe I'm making, whatever the case may be. But that's just my personal recommendation, in my humble opinion. I recommend not adding garlic right at the beginning. Now, when it comes to the vegetables, you can just add in the celery leaves, that's fine. The carrots do not have to be peeled, leave the skins on. There's a lot of nutrition in there. The same with the onions, leave the skins on. They add color, they add flavor, and they add nutrition. There's a lot of nutrition in onion skins. And here I have some yellow onions and I have some red onions. And you can also add, if you've got some romaine lettuce that's maybe starting to get a little soft, that's wonderful to add in. That's very nutritious. The vegetables that I don't recommend are your cruciferous vegetables, like your broccoli, your cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, so on and so forth. The reason is, number one, they can add a strong flavor that may be off-putting. Second, they're very high in goitrogens. And goitrogens can be it's a compound that can be very hard on the thyroid. And so if you're going to be drinking bone broth on a regular basis, you don't want to be taking in all those goitrogens that could be hard on your thyroid. And by putting those cruciferous vegetables into your slow cooker or your stock pot or your Instant Pot, you're going to concentrate all of the goitrogens, because normally if you cook cauliflower or you cook broccoli and you drain the water, you've removed some of the goitrogens, and it's safer to eat the broccoli and cauliflower then, and especially adding a little butter always helps. So that's why I recommend not adding any cruciferous vegetables, but onions, carrots, celery, they're wonderful. Now, given that we're in cold and flu season, I like to sort of jazz up my bone broth, so to speak, by adding some other ingredients that are high in vitamins and minerals and high in various nutrients that herbs and spices have to offer that can help us fight off colds and flus, possibly prevent them, but also make us feel a little better if we do come down with a cold or a flu. And here I also have some mandarin oranges cut up, and I find that citrus, specifically citrus in the orange family, works beautifully in turkey bone broth. And it's a lovely flavor to have in your bone broth this time of year when citrus is coming into season. And the reason that I like to add this, especially during cold and flu season, is because the flesh of the mandarin, like most citrus, all citrus I believe, is high in vitamin C. And the skin contains essential oils that are very high in nutrients. They're very rich in antioxidants, especially the skin, to help fight off disease and to also help us get better, if we do get a cold. And then what I like to also add is my usual suspects. I do like to add a bay leaf for flavor and some peppercorns. And I'll take pictures of all of this and overlay them so you can see everything I've got on the plate here and everything I've got on the plate here up close. But I've got some, as I said, I've got the bay leaf, I've got some peppercorns, and then here I've got some sliced ginger. Ginger is wonderful, and especially when you want to build up your immune system. It's anti-inflammatory, it's antimicrobial, I mean, it's an antioxidant. I mean, it's just so rich in so many things and is wonderful to add to bone broth this time of year. And one thing I want to say, adding these things like the citrus, like the ginger, does not give an overpowering flavor. I just have a couple of knobs of ginger here, and that's a good place to start, maybe 2 inches or 3 inches in terms of the knob size of ginger sliced up, and start there and see how you like it. And if you find that, oh, it's so mild, you can add more, or if you find that it's too strong, you can add less next time. But either way, these are wonderful. Ginger is just wonderful to add this time of year to a bone broth. And then what I've got here, if you've never seen this before, this is fresh turmeric. Turmeric imparts a very mild flavor, but it's wonderful for you. And on the outside, it kind of looks like ginger, but with a little bit of an orange tinge coming through the skin. And then when you slice it open, it looks like a carrot. And it's so rich in anti-inflammatory properties, among so many other things, that when you are wanting to build up your immunity to fight winter illnesses, turmeric is wonderful. You often hear of the golden milk that people drink maybe when they're feeling under the weather, or they just want to fend off colds and flus. That's a wonderful drink, and it's made with turmeric. And I have a video where I show you how to make the golden milk, and I'll link to that in the iCards. But I love to add a little turmeric this time of year to my bone broth. And as I said, it's very mild flavor. I don't even think you'll really notice it. But the nutrition that we're adding through these spices is really good for us. So I'm going to go ahead and add in all of my veggies. And then we'll go ahead and add in our herbs and spices, and then we'll be ready to add in the water. And now we'll get this turmeric in here and the black peppercorns. I already put in the bay leaf and the ginger, and that is just wonderful. Now, the next thing that we'll do is we'll cover this with water. And what you want to remember is when it comes to making bone broth, too much water is an enemy of a good gelatinous bone broth. there are actually two enemies of the gelatin. One is too high a temperature and boiling it for too long. You can break the gelatin. You basically damage the collagen and it's not able to gel. And the other one is adding water. You may not necessarily be breaking the gelatin, but you're diluting it. And so you would have to drink more to get the benefits of the gelatin, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But I like to always make sure that when I strain my broth and refrigerate it, that it's nice and gelatinous. So what I recommend is that in this 7-quart slow cooker, or if we were doing this on a stock pot on the stovetop, put just enough water to cover. No more, no less, just enough to cover. And if there's a few pieces, leaves or celery, whatever, carrots bouncing up and sticking out, that's fine. Don't worry about it. And also too, in a slow cooker, you don't really want to, you want to make sure that you leave about 1 inch from the rim, because as this cooks and simmers, it can bubble up a little, and sometimes I've had overflow when I've filled this a little too high. And then in your Instant Pot, you just follow the directions to not put anything past your fill line that's in the little insert of your slow cooker, that stainless steel insert. Well, let's go ahead and add our water, and then I will show you. I'll take a close-up picture so that you can see exactly how this looks once I get all the water in. Well, I've got this filled to where I want to have everything just slightly covered. There are a few things popping up, which is fine. I'll take a picture and overlay it so that you can see, because as this cooks, everything shrinks down a little and softens, and so this is perfect. And it'll be the same in your slow cooker, on the stovetop, in your stock pot on the stovetop, you know, just enough to cover and give yourself a little headspace at top so that there's no bubbling over. And then next, what we're going to do is in the slow cooker, we're going to turn this up to high. And on the stovetop, we're going to do the same thing. Now on the stovetop, it's going to come to a boil, you know, depending on what type of burner you have, electric or gas. It's going to come up to a boil. And the minute it comes up to a boil, turn your heat off. If you've got an electric burner, move your stock pot to a cool burner and wait till that burner turns down to low, because that's what you want to do. You're going to just turn it off, move your stock pot, or and let it cool down and then put it on low. If you have a gas stove, just turn your gas to low, and then what you're going to want to do is skim off any foam, it's known as scum, that comes to the top. And often what you'll find when you're using a cooked chicken, I often make bone broth with a roast chicken, or in this case a roast turkey, you're not going to have a lot of foam or scum that's going to come to the top the way you do with beef bones. But whatever you see, just remove it off, and that'll help in the long run to make your final product more clarified. Now, in the slow cooker, keep it on high for about an hour or so and let it come up to temp. It'll probably, be somewhere in the 180 or to 200 degree range at that point. And you may start to see little pockets of foam forming on top. Now, it may not come up to a boil. Every slow cooker is different. And I know some of you have told me that you've had it on high for like 4 hours and it's still not up to a boil, and you're like, what the heck am I supposed to do? So don't worry about it. Just keep it on high for about an hour. That's going to bring it up to a good, nice warm temperature, a nice hot temperature. And then after that hour, turn it down to keep warm. Now, if you don't have a keep warm setting on your slow cooker, turn it down to low. And what you want to do is hopefully be able to maintain a temperature around 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if you can't, don't worry. If it's 190, 200, the collagen can pretty much withstand that and you're going to be okay. If it goes a lot higher than that, what you'll want to do is take your lid and just tilt it a little bit. to help let out some of the steam so that it doesn't get too overheated. If you see that even on low, it's boiling, you want to just tilt the lid and let out a little bit of the steam. The same for the stovetop, although it's a lot easier on the stovetop in terms of being able to control the temperature. Most stoves, whether they're gas or electric, once you put it down to low, you're going to get a very low simmer. What you're looking for are just little bubbles coming up periodically. Bloop, 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 like that. So you don't necessarily need to have a food thermometer to test it. As long as you have it on low and you just see the occasional bubble coming every few seconds or so intermittently, chances are that's the right temperature. With a slow cooker, pretty much you can kind of get the same appearance if you don't have a food thermometer. If you have a food thermometer, you can just put it in and you can see what temperature you're maintaining your bone broth at on low. But if you don't have a food thermometer, don't worry about it. Just look for the same thing. You don't want a rolling boil. You want something that may look just more like a very low simmer. And as I said, if on low you find it is boiling, then just tilt your lid a bit and you should be fine. So I've got this on high. I'm going to put my lid on. I'm going to leave it like that for an hour. And then after an hour, I'm going to turn it down to warm and I'm going to let it simmer for 6 hours. 6 hours in the slow cooker, 6 hours on the stovetop, and 2 hours pressure low for 2 hours in the Instant Pot. Well, I had this on high for 1 hour, then I turned it down to warm for 6 hours, and now I've turned it off and we're ready to strain it. Now I'll take a picture and overlay it so you can see exactly what it looks like when everything's cooked up. But the first thing that I like to do as I go through the straining process is remove all of the vegetables, any herbs or spices that I've added, the ginger, so on and so forth. Now, things really disintegrate, so there may be some little bits of turkey like this. I'm going to put that in the larger bowl. Plus, we're going to examine the feet very closely because I'll show you up close. It's hot. But the feet are still fairly intact. So I'm not going to discard the feet. I'm going to put these on a separate plate and I'm going to save these and reuse them to make another batch of bone broth. On chicken feet, you can pretty much add to anything. I know some of you have asked me, can I add chicken feet to bone broth? Yes, certainly. If you can't find oxtails or so on and so forth, you can go ahead and add these. And they'll last, maybe a day or two in the fridge. But if you're not going to make another batch of bone broth right away, then wrap them well in a nice tight plastic bag and put them in the freezer. But they're very much intact here. So there's still definitely nutrition to be extracted from them. Now, these vegetables are pretty much spent, so to speak, that they've released all of their nutrition. Now, you can discard them, or as some of you have shared with me, you give them a really good rinsing, and then you put them in your compost pile, which is excellent. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the meat and the bones from the turkey, and if there's any nice falling off the bone, so to speak, pieces of turkey that I didn't get off when I went to put the scraps and so on and so forth in to make the bone broth, I'll fish that out, and if it's still tasty, I may use that in a soup or some other little dish that may call for a little chopped turkey, or a recipe that may call for chopped chicken where you can substitute chopped turkey, just so that we use up every little bit and we don't really waste much. Well, I've got everything strained out of the bone broth, and now you have a couple of options as to what steps you want to take next. You can transfer this from the slow cooker into a bowl and put it into your refrigerator and let it chill overnight. The fat will rise to the top, and all the little bits that I wasn't able to strain out just with my little spider strainer will sink to the bottom. You can skim off the fat and then remove your nice gelatinous bone broth, and then you can discard the little bits that are on the bottom. However, I like to take a few extra steps to make a really nice clarified bone broth that I can just put in a jar and have it be ready. And what I do is I take some type of vessel. I'm just using a glass measuring cup so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. And then what I'll do is I'm going to line this with the strainer and we're going to pour the broth through it. Now this is just a regular hand strainer, and this is a flour sack towel. It's basically a very, very thin dish towel or a very thin tea towel. Now you can certainly use cheesecloth, but I like to use flour sack towels. They're very reasonable and they're reusable. So you can wash this and just, clean it off a little bit and then go ahead and wash this with your dish towels. And these have lasted me for years, as opposed to cheesecloth, which may last one or two tries, one or two uses, but it will start to disintegrate and you'll have to discard it. So I highly recommend these. And you can find these at any of the big box stores. They're also available online, so if you can't find them locally, I'll put a link in the description below where you can find these, but they're wonderful and they have many uses. Alrighty, well the next thing that we're going to do, and I'm just going to bring this closer so I don't have any drips, is to just start spooning out, ladling out the bone broth right through this cheesecloth, or not, it is flour sack towel. And then I'm going to show you why I like to do this, all the little bits of debris that it catches. And the reason that I like to do this is if you just refrigerate that as is and skim the fat off in the morning and then discard the little bits of debris on the bottom, there is a little bit of bone broth mixed in with that debris. And I like to be able to get every last bit of bone broth out of the batches that I make. So I like to take this extra step. So this is all the debris I've catched so far, and I'll take a close-up picture so that you can see this. But that's why I like to take this extra step of straining it. Now this is getting a little full, so I'll show you what the next step is. Now, you can go ahead and store this in a half-gallon size jar. You can store it in smaller portions depending on how you're planning on using it. This is a 2-cup size jar. This is a 1-cup size jar. And I like to use these jars. I think I've shared with you in the past, they're called either French jelly jars or French working glasses, I think. And the reason that I like these is they're very thick, and I'll put my bone broth in here. I'll leave a good amount of headspace, about 1 inch, and then I'll put this plastic lid on and I can put it in the freezer. And I've never had any trouble with these. I know some of you have said you use canning jars, wide mouth canning jars, and that works. Others of you have told me that you're not comfortable doing that because you've had some breakage, but I've never had any breakage with these. And what's nice is that if for any reason it expands more than the frozen bone broth expands more than the amount of headspace that I've left, all it does is bloop, it just kind of pops off the plastic lid. So I find these work very well. And again, you can find these in pretty much any of the local kitchen stores in your area, maybe at your grocery store, around where they sell the storage containers. But they're also available online, and I'll be sure to put a link to these below. They're very handy. Now at this point, the fat is still here. It's even starting to rise to the top now. You can pour this into your storage vessel, whatever you're using, and if you go ahead and do this and leave the fat on, the fat will rise to the top and it'll make somewhat of a seal. It's not 100% perfectly airtight, but it's still a pretty good seal, and that'll help extend the refrigerated life of this. It can last, I find, a good week. Some of you have shared with me that you found that with the fat on top, it's lasted a good 2 weeks. So that's nice. And so that's the step that you can take if you want to do that. However, I find that I use bone broth, when I put it in this size jar, I use it up very quickly, either in recipes or for drinking. Generally, when I freeze bone broth, and I want to keep, or generally if I want to extend the life of my bone broth, I generally freeze it, and then I'll put it in these measures because I'll either use it in place of any recipe that calls for water. So if I need it to make rice or grains or soup, whatever the case may be, I'll just pull one of these out of the freezer, whether I need a 1 cup or a 2 cup measure. So I like to take one more step, and I like to defat this before I decant it for the refrigerator. And I'll show you what I like to use. Those of you who've made bone broth with me in the past, in some of my other videos, you've seen me use this fat separator. This is such a clever little gadget. It's not expensive. I've seen them now at a lot of the local kitchen stores. You can also find it online. I'll definitely put a link below. But it's so easy to use. All you do is pour your bone broth into this vessel, into this fat separator, and what will happen is the fat is going to rise to the top. And then, I'll show you, because this is a very, very clever design. When the fat rises to the top, the broth is all underneath. There's a lever here, and there's a little spigot that will open when you press this lever on the bottom. And all you do is allow the broth to strain down into whatever vessel you're using to store it. And then when you see the fat line get down here, you just stop. And then you can decant your fat into a different type of storage container to use later for cooking, and so on and so forth. So it's a very clever device. And I'll take a picture so that you can see this up close where the fat is rising to the top. So now I'll just get ready to strain this right down into my glass jar, and when I get to the fat line, I'll stop. And now I'll get another container to store the turkey fat in, and I'll just finish draining that right into there. Well, I've got this all decanted up. I put a little bit in the refrigerator to chill so we can see the level of gelatinousness that it turned into. But I also have a little bit in here. I want to take a little taste, and we'll see how this is. Oh, that's wonderful. Got a little bit of the ginger, a little bit of the citrus, but very mild, just delightful. This is going to be great to use in any type of recipe. And look at this beautiful gelatinous broth. Let me scoop some out here. Oh, look at that. Just glorious. And I'll also overlay a little video so that you can see exactly how nicely gelatinous this is, like Jell-O. So we've got over a gallon of turkey bone, but not a gallon, half gallon of turkey bone broth here, a 2 cup measure, a 1 cup measure, and then some wonderful turkey fat to use to cook with. And think of this, how wonderful this is. The turkey carcass might have just gone into the garbage, but instead you have all of this fantastic nutrition that you can use to drink or to make other recipes with. So I really hope that you'll do this with your turkey carcass. And if you'd like to learn more about traditional nutrient-dense cooking, be sure to subscribe to my channel and then click on this video over here where I show you how to make all kinds of bone broth. Beef bone broth, chicken, fish, and in different appliances, including the Instant Pot. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.